Hello there BookTube, how you doing? I've got a tag video for you today. I'm going to be doing the rapid fire book tag, and in the spirit of the tag I'm going to try and get through it at a pretty good pace. We'll see how that goes, see if I ramble on too much. But I was tagged in this by Mark at Book Time with Elvis, and it was created by Camila at Girl Reading. I'll link them underneath in the description. So let's jump into the tag, let's see how it goes. So the first prompt is ebook or physical book. Generally I prefer a physical book, not necessarily because I don't like the idea of an ebook. It's just that at least when I used to have PDFs and things like that on my phone or on my computer, I just forget that they were there. But that's just really because I haven't worked up the habit of it. I've now actually got a little Kindle here that I've been using a little bit, and I've actually been quite enjoying reading from that. So although I always used to prefer having a physical book, that might be changing, or at least I might be trying to find a balance, which I think it's always good to have a balance in life. Next is paperback or hardback. Generally I prefer paperback, mainly because it's cheaper, and I don't feel too bad if it gets scuffed or I spill coffee on it, and I do tend to treat a hardback book as if it were a cheap a cheap paperback or something. I do throw them around and carry them with me, so it's safer for the book, I suppose, if it's a paperback, because I'm not going to feel guilty afterwards. The next up is online or in-store shopping. Generally I prefer in-store. I do both a fair bit, but I enjoy exploring a bookshop. I suppose at least I tend to go into a bookshop more to explore and see what's there. I might have a few books in the back of my mind, but if I don't find them, that's fine, and it's more about just seeing what I do come across, really. And what appeals to me on that occasion. Then next up is trilogies or series. Neither really appeal to me massively. With both of them, I'd feel a bit of a pressure to get through them all. As soon as I'm starting the first book. I don't really have a preference. I don't really gravitate towards them. If I had to choose, probably a trilogy because it's shorter. But there are some series that I've enjoyed in the past. Heroes or villains? Probably heroes. I probably just get a bit depressed or something if I was spending too long just focused on villains. But really I prefer someone who's kind of in the middle, who's not put up on a pedestal or anything, that's just that's flawed but maybe has good intentions or redeeming qualities. I think that's a little more relatable, a little more interesting. And then a book that you want everyone to read. I found this quite hard because I'm not the kind of person that really wants to. I don't really want to be forcing my opinions or anything like that on anybody. But I just thought, really, when it comes to the old classics of world literature, of which I haven't read that many, or not as many as I'd like, I would just encourage people to dip their toe in, things like that. Things like the Divine Comedy. And I'd also encourage someone to just before buying it or borrowing it from the library or whatever, just to read a few lines, see if the translation, if it's a translated work, to see if you get on with it, just see how you do, and not to feel too much pressure to read it at that time. Maybe it's not the right time, maybe it's not the right book. These things can change, I suppose. And then recommend an underrated book. I got a bit of a weird one here. So the poet Ted Hughes comes up a fair bit on this channel. He's one of my favourite writers, and his third collection, Wodwo, is quite a strange collection. His two earlier collections, Lupercal and The Hawk in the Rain, are both, they have more of his famous poems in them, and the collection that came after this, Crow, as well, is quite famous. I think all three of them are still in print. I'm not sure if Wodwo is still in print. And it's kind of a weird mashup. You know, it has it's kind of bookended by poems, and then in the middle it has some short stories, and has a radio play in it as well. But it's really interesting, and he's exploring themes of transformation and growth, and some of my favourite Ted Hughes poems are in here, and the short stories are worth a look as well. And the radio play in there, called The Wound, is actually really good. So yeah, I don't know if it's in print, but if you come across it, and it's not massively overpriced or anything, I'd recommend giving it a go, if you're into that kind of thing. Then next up is the last book you finished. It's over here. It's French Tales, edited and translated by Helen Constantine. It's a collection of short stories put together, and they're either set in or from different areas, different provinces of France. For me, this was just dipping my toe into a little more French literature. I haven't read that much, and there are a few authors in here that I did quite get on with, so that was a good experience with that book, even if I didn't enjoy everything in it. Then the last book you bought, which will remain a secret because it's a gift for someone, and just in case they end up watching this video, I'm not going to mention it. Then the weirdest thing you've used as a bookmark to date, it's in here, this book at the moment, Chinese takeaway menu, which I suppose if you're hungry while reading, you can decide what to read, what to eat while reading. Although it's not very practical because it's actually a takeaway that's not at all close to where I live. And then used books, yes or no? Yes, I love a good used book. I love a good used bookshop, a second-hand bookshop. I love the smell, I love the history. I love finding little inscriptions in books, which I think some people have mentioned. There was an inscription in actually my edition of Crow by Ted Hughes. It was sort of dedicated to someone, and they said, "I hope you like this. He's not a good he's not as good a poet as you, but you might still enjoy it," or something like that, which I thought was quite funny. Then number 12, top 3 favourite genres. These aren't really genres. To start off, I'm quite interested in exploring books that don't really fit into a genre. I think the term genre bending is kind of floating around, but a book like The Rings of Saturn by Sebald, which for me is actually a bit of a page turner. I love something like this, and I'd be interested to read more things like this. I have a few other Sebald books knocking around that I need to get to, and yeah, I like the idea of a book that exists between travel writing and fiction and history and all these things. And then there's obviously I love poetry as well. I'm not sure if that really counts as a genre. I wouldn't necessarily. It's, I suppose, more a medium anyway, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a genre. And I also love anything with a kind of hint of oral storytelling to it, whether it's like a myth or a legend or folklore. So something like, say, the Mabinogion or the Toyn, or anything that still has some of that energy to it, of that sort of that just kind of old feeling that we don't really get in our modern prose or poetry really. And once I get my head in that space, I really love it. Then next up, borrow or buy. I prefer to buy. Sometimes when I borrow stuff I forget to give it back. I just get used to having it around the house. Characters or plot, it depends on the characters or the plot really. No, it's not really something I've ever been too aware of really, until someone pointed it out. I wasn't aware that people read a book either mainly for characters or for plot, or that a writer would write it with either more of a character focus or more of a plot focus. Just because I tended to read more out of a curiosity about the writing or the subject matter, not necessarily about the character or the plot. So yeah, but sometimes I'm drawn more to the other, but it depends on the way the book itself is working, I think. Then long or short books, I can't really decide. I'm generally attracted to a shorter book, I think, because you can finish it faster, you feel more accomplished, but I tend to feel a little more satisfied at the end of a longer book. An example, well, a very recent example would be The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, and it just felt so immersive to be in there, to be in that. And the same with Bleak House by Charles Dickens. But then there are some short books which, once I've finished them, they still feel like they're really long. So there's Borges's fictions. Yeah, even though the stories themselves can be really short, they're so massive. There's We've Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, a short book that felt a lot bigger to me. Oops, just dropping my books. The Blue Tent by Richard Gwynne. This feels like a much bigger book, but it's actually quite, it's quite skinny. And another recent one is The Invention of Morale by Casares. So yeah, I suppose it does depend on the book, and generally I feel a bit more satisfied at the end of a longer book, but that's not always the case. And then with longer or shorter chapters, again I'm attracted normally to shorter chapters because you feel more accomplished at the end of a chapter. It helps me keep my pace up. And there's a book I'm reading at the moment. Let's get it. Here it is. So it's Oscar and Lucinda by Peter Carey. And the some of these chapters are really, really short, maybe a couple of pages long. And they were so short, I wasn't sure how it would work, whether I'd be disorientated, how immersive the book would be, and yeah, really hats off to Peter Carey, so far, because it is actually very immersive, and it does feel like you're getting a lot of detail in a very short amount of space, which is pretty cool. But then something like Bleak House, has some very long chapters, and some books that have no chapters and just keep going, that I don't mind too much if the writing is good, if it carries you, if it keeps you interested. So yeah, I suppose pacing is more important to me than the length of the chapters. Then next up will be name the first 3 books that you can think of. So it's quite hard now because I'm just surrounded by books. But another book I'm reading at the moment is The Selected Poems of Borges, and I'm really enjoying that. Another book that I can think of is Nervous System. I've forgotten the name of the author, but that's a book that I really, really want to get to. And I just mentioned the Divine Comedy earlier, and that's still in my head. I'm looking for other translations. So yeah, they're the first 3 books that come to mind. Then next up is books that made you laugh or cry. I was trying to think. The last book in the Mortal Engines series, I think it's A Darkening Plain. That one got me going actually a bit. I think it wasn't the first series I read, but yeah, I found myself much more invested in the characters than I would normally be, which was quite cool. And then by the end I was absolutely destroyed. And in a book that made me laugh, I was reading the Book of Disquiet back in August. I was pointing generally to the shelves. Yeah, there's some really weird, actually quite depressing passages that I just couldn't help but laugh at because they were just so almost over the top in how sad they were. Yeah, sometimes something like that I can't help but laugh at it sometimes. And then our world or fictional worlds, which is quite an interesting question I found. I think a few other people have picked up on this when they've done it. And in a way, I think any world that you're reading is a fictional world. The world in Bleak House, as amazing as Charles Dickens' writing is, as immersive and comprehensive it may feel, it's not actually Victorian England. It's Victorian England as relayed to you by Charles Dickens, and so there's always going to be that filter to it. That's what makes it kind of fiction. And I suppose you could play that game to the point where you'd be talking about non-fiction as well, but yeah, I think really any world depicted in a work of fiction is a fictional world, but also those fictional worlds can feel very real at the same time. So yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't have a specific answer for it, and I've gone and closed my notebook. Then next up is audiobooks, yes or no? I don't really mind. I've listened to some audiobooks. I think I prefer, if I have headphones on, to be maybe listening to a podcast instead, or to some music or something like that. Just because variety is nice, and yeah, try to keep my reading to when I'm sat down and have the time to do it. Yeah, I don't mind doing other things. Next up is, do you ever judge a book by its cover? Yes, I do, not necessarily in the normal way, but sometimes if a book has a really nice cover, I can find myself getting a bit suspicious, and I'm like, oh, are they compensating for something? Yeah, are they trying to allure me with this really lovely cover, and it's actually not as good a book as I thought it was going to be. Yeah, that suspicion isn't always right, obviously, but yeah, I do find myself making that judgment from time to time. And then, yeah, book to movie or book to TV adaptations. I prefer book to TV adaptations. There's just that much more time. For you. You have to make so many sacrifices to get a book adapted into a film, and sometimes I just think it works a little bit better just to give it more time, more breathing space, and to have the TV show. I think a good example would be Pride and Prejudice. I think the mini-series works better than the films. It was pointed out to me that in the is it 2005 film, everybody's speaking really quickly, as if they're trying to just cram as much in time-wise as they can. And once that was pointed out to me, I couldn't really unsee it or unhear it. And yeah, I think I prefer to have that sort of breathing space, to have a bit of a slower pace, maybe include a little more, and let the spirit of the book exist for a little longer, maybe. And then a movie or TV show that you preferred to its book. I couldn't really think of one off the top of my head. There are quite a lot of adaptations of a book that I've watched where I haven't read the book. Trying to think of some examples. So like North and South. I've never read North and South, but I've enjoyed the mini-series. Trying to think if there are any others. I think I preferred the film of Emma to reading Emma as well. by Jane Austen. But yeah, yeah, I can't think of one that I've other than that. And then last question: series or standalone? I started edging towards my position on this earlier. I tend to prefer a standalone book. You know, I prefer to see one book that does what it does really well, rather than just have something stretched over a series and just have the feeling the commitment to have to keep reading. So that would be my answer there. And there we are. That's the end of the rapid fire book tag. I hope you found some of the answers interesting or weird. Please recommend me some books, specifically books that maybe don't fit into a specific genre, or that maybe are a little Venn diagram of multiple genres. I'd be fascinated to hear what suggestions you'd bring up. But there we have it. I'm not going to tag anyone, but please feel free to do it if you're watching. And I hope to see you soon. All right, bye bye.